I know this world is constantly rushing. Deadlines, traffic, alerts, bills. We move so fast, we forget to pause. You probably have 100 reasons to skip this story. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you. So, if you're still here, even for a few seconds, I'd really appreciate it. I'm not telling this to stir drama or to expose anyone. I'm telling it as someone who stayed silent for 25 years. Someone who was lied to gently but thoroughly. And I've decided that silence isn't peace, it's just space held for someone else's comfort. I'm not trying to make anyone listen. I just hope that if you've ever wondered why you never felt quite seen, quite chosen, maybe you'll find a piece of yourself in this. If you feel it, leave a very gentle sign, a light touch on the like button, just so I know someone else still believes in truth. It happened at my college graduation dinner. Not the ceremony, not the cap toss, not the handshake. No, it happened after, when the plates were cleared, the champagne half warm, and the room full of relatives who only remembered me when it was convenient. We were at a private room in a restaurant downtown. Boston, of course. Always Boston. The city my family thought they owned. My aunt, Cheryl, stood up to make a toast. My father gave her that look, the make it polished look. She clinked her glass 3 times. I just want to say how proud we are of Lily, she said, fake smile glimmering like the diamonds she wore too often. Graduating top 5% from Columbia? Polite applause. But let's not forget where she came from, she added, her voice suddenly sharper. She's made a lot out of very little, especially considering, well, she was gone before I could stand up. The host whispered something about wrong room and quietly shut the door. But I knew. Every part of me knew. The way her eyes clung to mine, how her hands trembled at her sides like they'd wanted to reach out but didn't dare. That wasn't a mistake. That was a moment 25 years in the making. No one said a word. The dinner resumed like nothing happened, like they hadn't just witnessed a woman who looked like my shadow try to enter my life. Later that night, I asked my father who she was. He scoffed. Just a lunatic, he said, without even looking up from his phone. Trying to insert herself into things she doesn't belong in. Don't worry about it. But the thing is, I did worry, because I had spent my whole life not quite belonging. My childhood was clean, curated, almost rehearsed. The Jordan house was full of antiques and rules, polished staircases, velvet curtains, and a dining room we weren't allowed to enter unless guests came. My bedroom had pastel walls and a bookshelf filled with novels I wasn't allowed to annotate. My aunt lived with us. I never questioned why. She handled my birthdays, though the gifts always came with tags that felt secondhand. She'd smile when handing me a dress, only to mutter, "Try not to spill on this one like last year." One year, I painted her a picture of our garden. She called it childish. It ended up in the trash. There were no baby photos of me in the house, not one. When I asked, I was told, "It was too painful for your father." So I stopped asking. I started learning how to stay invisible, how to predict the quietest place at the table, how to thank people who looked right through me. I wasn't abused. I was just overlooked, like a forgotten heirloom in a mansion too big for truth. I waited for someone to mention her, that woman, but no one did. Not Dad, not Cheryl, not the cousins who'd sat frozen as she stood there, framed in the doorway like a secret begging to be acknowledged. It was like the moment had been scrubbed. I didn't even know how to look her up. I had no name, no photo, just her face, stamped into my memory like a watermark. Then, 3 days later, something strange happened. I was walking up the front steps after work, and Mr. Dorsey, our old neighbor who tended the shared courtyard, waved me over. He was quiet, the kind of man who always smelled faintly of mulch and mint. He had watched me grow up from behind trimmed hedges and offered me lemonade in summers. "I saw your mother," he said, like he was commenting on the weather. I froze. He scratched the side of his nose, almost shyly. "She used to come by every spring, just stood at the end of the block, watching the house. Always left something at the gate. Little things, flowers, cards. But they never made it inside, I guess." My heart stalled. He reached into his back pocket and handed me an envelope. Yellowed. No return address. Just my name in careful cursive. Lily. I opened it with shaking fingers that night, sitting on the edge of my bed like I used to as a kid. Knees pulled to my chest, eyes wide in the dark. Inside was a single piece of paper. "You don't know me yet, but I never stopped knowing you. I wasn't allowed to send letters. They told me I had no right. But if you're reading this, maybe something broke open. I'm still here. M." Just M, not Mom, not Margaret. Just a letter. A whisper of a name I'd never been taught. And suddenly, everything I'd always dismissed as coincidence began to ache with clarity. The envelope didn't have a stamp. That meant it had never been mailed. It was hand-delivered. Just like Mr. Dorsey said, slipped under gates, left in shadows, hoping for a miracle. A miracle that I'd somehow see it before it was taken again. I read the letter 5 times. Then I tore through the attic. Our attic was pristine, like a museum storage room. Labeled boxes, straight rows. My aunt kept everything in order. Old tax records, linens, even my father's golf trophies from the 90s. But there was one unlabeled box, dusty, and pushed behind a broken lamp. Inside, my old yearbooks, childhood drawings, and at the very bottom, a thin blue folder tied with gold string. Inside that, a second letter, this one older, its corners worn soft. "Lily, if you are reading this, it means they've erased me again. But I want you to know, I never left you. I was pushed out. When I tried to fight for you, they called me unstable. When I asked to see you, they said I would confuse you. They convinced the courts. They convinced the doctors. But I never stopped being your mother. Your name was my prayer. Margot. Margot. My real mother's name. The name I had never once heard spoken aloud. There was a photo tucked inside. A grainy image of a young woman holding a newborn, looking exhausted but overjoyed. On the back, Lily. Day 1. I sat on the attic floor for a long time, maybe hours. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in, like it's trying to choke the truth. And in that moment, one thing became painfully clear. My mother hadn't died. She'd been erased. Deliberately. Strategically. Lovingly, they said. But love never requires that much silence. I took the photo, both letters, and folded them into a notebook I hadn't opened in years. My childhood journal, filled with awkward poems and doodles. It felt fitting, like bringing truth back to the place where I first began learning how to lie to myself. I closed the box, stood up, and stared at the attic ceiling. That was the moment I decided. I needed to find her. Not for confrontation. Not even for closure. Just, it took me 2 weeks to find her. Margot didn't exist on social media. Her name didn't pull up any clear hits. I tried everything. Reverse lookups, archived obituaries, even the alumni databases from my college. Nothing. Then I remembered the return address on the locket box. Years ago, on my 15th birthday, a package arrived with no name. Just a small velvet case and that delicate necklace inside. My aunt called it a weird trinket and tossed the box in the bin. But I'd memorized the zip code. Bennington, Vermont. A tiny town with more trees than streetlights. I drove 6 hours in silence, past snow-frosted trees and frozen gas stations. The further I got from Boston, the lighter my chest felt, like I was driving out of a lie I'd been raised in. When I arrived, I didn't have an address, just a hunch. I stopped at the local bookstore, a narrow brick building tucked beside a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke. The sign above the door read, "The Marginalia." I stepped inside. Bells on the door chimed. It was warm, full of crooked shelves and handwritten signs. A woman stood behind the counter, sorting paperbacks into piles. She looked up. Her hands stilled. Our eyes met, and I knew. The lines around her eyes deepened. Her mouth opened, just a little. Her shoulders dropped like they'd been holding tension for a lifetime. She whispered, "Lily?" My throat closed. I nodded. Neither of us moved for a full 10 seconds. Then she stepped out from behind the counter and stood in front of me. Closer now, I saw the gray streaks in her hair, the chipped nail polish, the freckles we shared. "I didn't want to leave you," she said, voice barely above a breath. "They made me a ghost." I didn't cry. I didn't collapse into her arms. I just pulled out the folded letter and held it between us. She looked down at her own handwriting and swallowed hard. We didn't speak after that. Not for a long time. I just followed her into the back of the store, where she made tea in a chipped yellow kettle. She handed me a cup, like I was someone she always knew would come back. And somehow, in that small, cluttered room that smelled of old books and bergamot, I finally exhaled. The next morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by old files and manila folders tied in twine. No small talk, no apology tour, just a soft invitation. "If you want answers," she said, "they're here." Inside the folders were copies of court motions, dated letters, medical evaluations, paper trails of a life rewritten in legal ink. She had tried to keep me, fought for joint custody, offered mediation. But my father and Cheryl had painted her as unstable, emotional, unsafe. One file held receipts from weekly therapy appointments. Another had letters she wrote to the judge, each more desperate than the last. They said she was unfit because she left school to take care of me, that she lived unstructured, that she had no family support system. The irony? That was all because of them. She pointed to a yellowed envelope marked "Trust Transfer, Jordan Holdings." "This," she said, "was meant for you." The trust. My mother's small inheritance from her parents had been designated for me in full. She'd set it up before I was even born. But Cheryl, listed as interim custodian during the legal battle, had never turned it over. "Your father said it would be safer under his care," she said quietly, "that he'd invest it for your future. Instead, he used it to buy a summer house in Cape Cod." My fingers shook as I traced the signature line. I recognized the lawyer's name. I'd met him at my cousin's wedding. He'd given me a drink with a smile and said, "You've grown into such a refined woman." And all the while, he'd helped erase my mother's legacy from my life. We found more. Journal entries, court transcripts, dated photographs with timestamps that proved she was nowhere near unstable. She had even written letters to my high school, hoping to attend parent-teacher conferences. They never reached me. They never even reached the school. It had all been filtered, controlled, erased. I returned to Boston 2 weeks later. Not to reclaim anything, not to scream or slam doors or demand apologies. I came back because some truths don't need permission to be spoken. Thanksgiving was the perfect stage. The Jordans loved appearances, and holidays were their theater. I walked into the family estate without calling ahead. My name was still engraved on the brass gate. No one had ever bothered to change it. The moment I stepped inside, the room hushed. My aunt froze mid-pour of Pinot Noir. My father's smile dropped like a snapped branch. My cousins gave me that look, a mix of curiosity and fear, like they weren't sure if I was a guest or a ghost. I sat at the dinner table like I'd never left. No announcement, no theatrics, just silence. Until I asked a single question. "Where's my mother's letter?" The room went colder than the wind outside. My father stared at his plate. Cheryl cleared her throat. "We've moved on from that nonsense," she said, her voice sugar-wrapped in disdain. "You're being manipulated, again." My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I pulled out the trust documents and placed them on the white linen tablecloth like a final course. One by one, I laid down the proof. Margot's letters, court filings, the certified trust papers, even a notarized statement from her old therapist confirming she was never diagnosed with instability. Silence. Then, someone unexpected spoke. My uncle, Stephen, the quiet man who never did anything louder than carve a turkey. He pushed back his chair, stood, and said, "I told you this would catch up with you." I left before dessert. No one followed me. No one begged me to stay. And that was the final answer I didn't know I needed. I didn't leave angry, not theatrical. No slammed doors, no shouted accusations. Just a quiet step back from a table I was never really invited to. Before closing the front door behind me, I turned to my father one last time. "I don't need your apologies," I said, voice even. "I don't need to be loved by people who taught me to doubt my own memories. I just need air that isn't filtered through your version of me." He didn't reply. Not because he didn't have words, but because he knew they would no longer land. As I walked down the gravel driveway, I remembered all the times I'd stood in front of that house with hope in my throat, hoping to be seen, chosen, acknowledged. Tonight, there was no hope, just clarity. That's stronger. Back at my apartment, I opened my drawers and gathered everything that had once been offered as family legacy. The bracelet from Aunt Cheryl. The monogrammed leather wallet from Dad. Even the framed photo from high school graduation. The one where I stood smiling between people who had already begun the process of erasing my mother. I placed it all in a box. Then I carried it to the trash chute. Letting go didn't feel like victory. It felt like honesty. The next day, my phone lit up with missed calls and messages. "We should talk. Let's not make this bigger than it is. Lily, be smart." I moved to Vermont 2 weeks later. Margot cleared out a spare room above the bookstore. Small, slanted ceilings, windows that stuck when it rained. The walls were lined with mismatched bookshelves and faded posters of poetry festivals from the 90s. It wasn't grand. It was mine. The first morning I woke up there, sunlight hit the hardwood floors like a quiet kind of promise. I padded to the kitchen barefoot, the floor warm from the radiator. Margot handed me a mug of black coffee and a notebook. "We start small," she said. We did. Together, we launched a community space at the back of the bookstore, a reading room for girls with complicated families, estranged parents, foster youth, anyone who felt like their last name didn't protect them, but imprisoned them. We called it The First Page. Every week, I ran a writing circle. We didn't teach grammar. We taught voice. We taught how to untangle pain from memory, how to write what you couldn't yet say out loud. One girl wrote about her dad's silence. Another wrote about growing up with 6 last names and no birthday cake. They shared. They cried. They laughed. And I saw myself in each of them. Margot taught poetry in the afternoons, haikus about healing, spoken word pieces about grief. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was real, strong, scarred. In time, we framed one of her old letters on the wall. They tried to silence me, but I remembered how to write. We didn't talk much about the Jordans. She didn't ask what happened after Thanksgiving. I didn't volunteer it. Some stories don't need repeating. Instead, we told new ones. We hung up photos, not curated portraits, just candid shots from writing workshops and book club nights. We found an old typewriter and placed it in the window. A little rusted, but still alive. Like us. The locket she gave me all those years ago, the one Aunt Cheryl said smelled weird, sat on the counter next to a vase of violets. I opened it sometimes and just looked. Because now, snow fell early that year. Big flakes, soft and slow, like the world was exhaling. I sat near the front window of the bookstore, legs tucked beneath me, watching a girl named Amira read her first poem aloud. "Not all mothers vanish," she said. "Some are erased, some fight, some wait." Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. After class, I stayed late to clean up. Folded chairs, stacked books, teacups. Margot was upstairs, humming something I didn't recognize. The quiet felt earned now, not forced. That night, I opened my old journal, the one I once filled with questions no one would answer. The first page still read, "They told me my mother died at birth." But the last page, it was blank. So I wrote, "This is the first night I don't feel like I have to explain myself to anyone." Then I closed it, not to forget, but to move forward. I walked outside, into the snow. No coat, just a scarf and my breath, fogging in the cold air. Downtown Bennington was quiet. A few lights in windows, a couple walking their dog. Laughter somewhere down the street. The bookstore behind me glowed amber. I stood on the sidewalk and whispered her name. Margot. It didn't hurt anymore. I didn't flinch when I said it. That was peace, not fireworks, not applause, just a soft understanding. I was never her mistake. I was her fight. And now, I get to be mine. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it comes decades too late. It reminds us that silence isn't always safety.